Okay, ready? All right, 5, 4, unscripted. You got your script?
Sagamore Rye. That's what we're doing.
Okay, well, let's talk about that first. The first call close is not as common as it used to be 10 or 15 years ago.
His second sentence is, stop calling my voicemail. And I'm like, Andy, I just can't do that.
The guy who just finished off his month at $500,000, the top guy in that company is the #1 follow-up guy.
Hey guys, good to chat again. Another episode, another dose of brilliance from the two of you. I love our show, 2.5 Experts.
Is that like 2.5 men?
It's 2.5 men, except we're 2.5 experts. All right. So, but I get by. I think I have a sister who is Ivy League educated, NYU, UCLA, super smart, and I don't know how smart she is, but really smart. But I always give her a hard time. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm making the best of my 8th grade St. Tammany junior high education. I'm milking it for every dollar it's worth.
Hours of education for dollars produced. You're winning.
Way.
Hashtag winning.
Hashtag winning. Not getting tired of winning either. So, hey guys, I was thinking, well, two things. Number one, first and foremost, G-Man, what are we drinking here, man?
We got a little Sagamore Rye.
Sagamore.
And it's, I believe it's from your neighborhood.
Well, a little south.
South of Philly.
Inner Harbor,
This is
Baltimore.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
It's a Baltimore whiskey, and it's strong. I mean, it packs a punch.
Yeah.
But it's an outstanding choice. Certainly goes well with the Partagas. And
Still working on the Romeo and Juliet.
Still working on your Romeo.
Yeah.
But I would highly recommend that. It's got a lot of flavor. It's an outstanding choice.
Yeah. It was funny when it came out of the box too. It was doing this dance with the smoke and oh, that was the Ray Lewis thing. The whiskey bottle was coming out. Hey, I want to talk about follow-up on sales leads. Drew, you've been teaching sales training in this industry for decades. Obviously, you've been consulting across the board in sales and business development, all those things. And of course, I wrote a book on mindset in sales.
New York Times bestseller.
Number 5. They did number 1. But I want to talk about follow-up because I don't know about you guys, and this is anecdotal, it's not statistical, but I kind of feel like in the last 10 years, homeowners have more information than ever because of the evil thing called the internet. Most of it's inaccurate, at least a good portion of it's inaccurate, especially around pricing, but they have the information. They're more sophisticated than ever. In general, consumers are. And I find that the first call close is not as common as it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. I feel like I lived and breathed and died on the one call close. I hated follow-up. But what I'm noticing in my company now and companies that I work with, that follow-up is more important than ever. And I actually just read a statistic that Service Titan had published that only 48% of salespeople in our industry follow up even once after the initial call. And that the average consumer purchases after 5 or 6 touches. Now that could be marketing touches and telephone calls, but people have to have 5 or 6 exposures to our company, and sales guys aren't following up at all. And I wanted to talk about the importance these days of following up on your leads. And you had a fantastic story about when you were selling, right? 25 years ago. And I want you to share that because I think it's so important and so valuable for our viewers, our listeners, that you share that story. And I'm going to tell you guys one about our very own David Delgado as well.
Yeah, so I was in Detroit, Michigan. I was working for Lennox, and we weren't doing well in the marketplace, so we needed some new dealers. And so my Lennox distribution facility was, at that time, was about 18,000 square feet. And right across the street was one of the largest contractors in the United States, and Bryant's 3rd largest contractor was a company called Andy Statewide. And they did basically all of Pulte's work as well as a bunch of other work. And his building was about 100,000 square feet. And he had this Bryant sign that stood there, and my office literally looked out at that sign.
I know not against Bryant, but they were the competition at the time.
Yeah, Bryant was the competition. Yeah, so I was working for Lennox.
For some of our younger listeners too, Pulte is a home builder.
Pulte is
A big home
still a
builder.
home builder,
And
a
I'm
very
sure
large
a lot of
home
people,
builder.
some people
And
may not know
Andy did every Pulte home in the state of Michigan, and he had a market share in the state of Michigan of 33% as a contractor. So
Tens of thousands of homes.
Andy is the contractor.
Wow.
And so when I got up there, I was just talking to my sales group, and I'm like, well, why do we not do business with Andy Opaleski? That's the owner of the company. And Andy has since sold the company and retired. But the deal was, well, he's Brian, he's Pulte, and we just can't get there. And so I made it a mission. It was one of these little goals that you set up. And so I basically, every Friday, my calendar reminded me to call Andy. So I called Andy every Friday and basically left him a voicemail and said, Andy, you know, really, we just need a few minutes. You're a Lennox dealer, you just don't know it yet. And just give me some time. And so 18 months of every single Friday went by and no response, nothing. And so persistence and follow-up paid dividends. I was taking my wife to a Valentine's Day dinner. I was driving my scarlet and gray Jeep in downtown Michigan. So that's a bold statement all by itself, because those are Ohio State colors. And these are the days when, for our younger listeners, there was no smartphone. The car phone was actually wired into the car. So I had this fancy Motorola car phone, and it rings. It's like 6 p.m. And my wife gives me the wife stare, like, you're not really going to answer this phone call. And we're going to Valentine's Day. And so I'm like, I have to take this call. I have to. So I pick up the phone, and Andy is on the other end. And Andy's voicemail and we have a personal relationship now. So he opens the conversation with, do you know who this is? And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Opaleski. I know exactly who this is. Thank you for the return call. His second sentence is, stop calling my voicemail. And I'm like, Andy, I just can't do that. If you give me 15 minutes, I promise you I will leave you alone. And so to really make a long story short, we did end up closing the deal. He gave us 15 minutes. That sales call lasted about 3 hours. And it was really just an opportunity for us to kind of present ourselves. So we ended up, closing the deal, and we got him moved over to Lennox. I helped him sell his business. He cashed out, and we're still friends to this day. But it took 18 months to even get a response. So that's follow-up.
And dude, here's the thing. Most guys would have given up after 7 or 8 months, or maybe even 2 or 3, I don't know.
Yeah.
And of course, persistence is a lesson that we've all learned in building your consulting business, your HVAC businesses, whatever. It's one of the hallmarks of success, right? Persistence. But I find that it's so important in this sales game. I read an article this morning, or last week rather, from a very well-known salesperson, not in HVAC, but in the industry, sales industry. And the interviewer would ask him, how many times do you follow up? He goes, well, I follow up until I get a yes or a no. So Drew, in your consulting and your training business that you and Russ do, obviously you're working with, over the course of your career, thousands of sales guys, but at any one time, maybe dozens or hundreds. What's kind of your advice to them on this whole concept of following up in relation to the one call close versus, a close later on in the deal?
That's a great question, and this is a great topic. It's, when I took over my family business in the 90s, and taking over the sales department, it was the one change that I made, because we were in new construction. That's how my father built the business, was really on new construction. And we had to make a shift. And when I took over the sales department, we weren't following up the leads. And I pulled up in the database the number of open leads, right? Meaning hadn't sold, and we hadn't basically closed it out with a code that says it was dead, lost to a competition, not doing anything, something. We had 500 and some open leads over the course of like a year and a half, right? For the 3 guys that I inherited. And so I just printed out the list. Now this is back in the day of a wide carriage dot matrix printer. Okay, I was printing out like on ledger paper, this wide, there, printed out sheet after sheet after sheet. I gave them to the 3 guys and I said, give me answers, give me updates on all of these leads. And so they cleaned up everything. And of course I knew that they were like, some of it they just didn't know about. I hadn't heard from them. They didn't probably call some of them back, but they called a lot, and they were actually able to resurrect some deals and get some business at a time in which we were slow. And so I saw that happen. And so that began the process of what I called the next contact report. And the next contact report started out monthly. And then we drilled it down to 2 weeks. Then we drilled down to a week. Then we drilled it down to a day. Now we drilled down to debrief after the call, much like we do every service call, right? The funny thing is my dad's philosophy was, Drew, the more they sell, the more they make. Why do we got to police these guys? And I said, because you domesticated them. They're not hunting anymore.
Right.
And they focus on what's hot and not what's not. And we've got the 2-call close down, which I think, like you said a minute ago, is something that has come back around. Today, I think more than ever, and I'm going to do a webinar on it this week, but the statistics bear out that only 20 to 30% of the people will buy on the initial visit, right? And 10% of the people aren't going to buy for you for any reason or no reason at all. So that would say to you then, 60 to 70% of the time, I should be doing a 2-call close. The funny thing is when I travel around, I do the EGIA classes, I do my coaching. I've been into a couple companies here recently during this whole lockdown thing. And every single one of them, I've talked to no less than 50 salespeople in these last couple of months, brand new salespeople I've never worked with before. Every single one of them presents 100% of their quotes on the initial visit. And when I ask them what percentage of them do they close on the initial visit, it's like around 25 to 30%. They get the rest of it in either follow-up or the customer calls back. But when you ask the guys, you go and dig a little bit deeper, right? And you say, how often do you follow up? And they'll say like once or twice, and then I get busy and they have my price. If they're interested, they'll call back. We're so expensive. If we don't get it on the initial visit, we're not going to probably get it. And so they tell themselves a story about, not following up,
Right.
And they don't. And the funny thing is I say to the people who do follow up, I say, has a customer ever told you that the only reason that you got the business is that you're the only one who followed up?
Yeah.
And invariably everybody has these stories. And you're like, so to me, there's something in there to be said about the follow-up. And so let me kind of bring this full circle and say to you this. I can go to a company, not generate one more lead, not spend one more marketing dollar, and I can double that business in a year.
And they're lost leads.
On their lost leads. Yep. All I have to do is implement lead track. Even if I don't touch the service department, if I just implement lead tracking and basically follow it, like you said, from inception to death, cradle to grave, if you will, and lock it down and plug in my process of making sure these guys debrief every moment, every day, on everything. You schedule everything. You schedule phone calls, right? So we don't actually just schedule a go-back appointment. I'll schedule a phone appointment. And so you have to report in on a phone appointment. Well, I called them, I got a voicemail. Okay, I'm assuming the customer's not calling you back. So when are you calling them back? When are you emailing? When are you texting, right? When are you going to show up at the house? And teach these guys, this. No secret that the guy in every company that I've ever worked with, including several of my current clients, the guy who just finished off his month at $500,000, the top guy in that company is the #1 follow-up guy.
That's
and,
right.
and he will call them until they say, stop calling me.
So
No,
I have a question for you,
yeah.
just along those lines. So a lot of companies have moved to the service tech selling model.
Yeah.
And so we're a hybrid, so we do a little bit of both. But we see our techs challenged when it's this hot. It's 111 degrees in Arizona.
We're busy.
Is this not Rehashed Leads? Is this not an opportunity for the software platform that you have?
Yeah, no, and exactly. We're doing a thing with EGIA right now that EGIA members can get 20% off a month off the subscription, but it essentially automates the entire follow-up process, right? Once you go on your initial lead, if you don't close it, which by the way, seemed like 10 years ago we were closing 40% or so on the first call. Now it's 25, 30%.
Yep.
It's changing. And so you drop them in and it initiates a 14-day campaign. That campaign is value, 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 ask. So it sends them information from videos that we produce on choosing the right contractor, a proper installation, then maybe an article from Department of Energy, whatever, and then like, hey, here's a $250 off coupon. But here's the thing. To me, this is the real challenge. And by the way, rehashedleads.com, shameless plug. But you can get actually go to the contractor marketplace at EGIA and buy it because you can save 20% off the subscription rate indefinitely. It's not just for the first month, indefinitely. You take the average residential sales guy, runs, 400 leads a year, whatever, maybe 500. Closes, let's say that 30%. So he gets 150 deals out of the 500. How many of those 350 people bought from somebody else?
Right.
And if we're not following up on a consistent basis, then we're going to lose an awful lot of business. And what I've noticed is like the best performing companies, they have entire rehashed departments, right? They have a rehashed lead coordinator. One of the biggest challenges, we've all dealt with sales guys. They run the lead, they don't sell it. They don't want to turn the lead back in. They don't want to close it out. Oh, I'm going to call that guy back next week. I'm going to call that guy back next week. Well, what we started doing in my company is I built a new tracking system for our salespeople. And there's two columns. There's your first call close rate and what we call the rehash rate, right? So now there's no disputing with the sales guy. If he comes back in and says, well, I'm still working it, okay, but you didn't close it on the first call, did you? Because that was last night. We don't have a deal yet. So it's closed for that purpose, and it goes in their first call close rate. If they get it 3 or 4 days later, and of course the combination of those two things are the rehash rate. But what we're finding is just as you said, 25 to 30% in the first call, another 10 to 15% or so on secondary, third, fourth calls, whatever it is. It's critically important. People are not buying as often on the first call, I believe because they're more sophisticated, more education than ever, much of it inaccurate on the internet for sure. But we have to have a consistent process to follow up. And I've had lots of conversations with contractors. When does that lead get turned over to rehash? Well, that's different for every company, but there has to be a standard. 72 hours, 1 week, whatever you want it to be. But if that lead belongs to the company, the owner of the company paid $300 or $400 or $500 for that lead, right? The salesman doesn't own it, right? They're leasing it, they get some money. But whatever that time is, and we'll give them 72 hours, then it goes back in the rehash, and we're going to work it. Now, the salesperson still gets some commission if we sell it later.
Some commission.
I don't want to beat them out of it, but a lot of guys know that the rehash people will work it harder than they can because they don't have time. Like you said, service technicians, they don't have time to follow up.
Right.
They get overwhelmed. They got a stack of numbers, and again, that's where we talked about this in a previous episode of Unfiltered. You got to have systems and technology to track that stuff.
Yes.
And that's what Rehash does. It allows you to keep track of all those lost leads. Every time somebody watches a video, every time somebody interacts, the salesperson gets a notification, right? So now I know who to follow up with, right? That's a clue. They just watched a video. They just opened a coupon, right? Let me call them back. Whatever you do, whether you do it manually, I just did a show for this for EGIA, which will come out, I think, in the second week of June. So it'll be on the EGIA website about the rehash process, whether it's manual and just doing it the old school way or using technology, doesn't matter, but we got to follow up. One quick story I want to tell you guys about our very own David Delgado, who is a part of the EGIA team and does mostly work with distributors and manufacturers, but some contractors as well. So he used to work for a company out in Las Vegas called Lightspeed, and Lightspeed builds learning platforms. Years ago, and when I had the HVAC Sales Academy, I wanted to build this platform, this online training platform. And I found the company. I talked to this guy, David Delgado. This was probably in 2013, something like that. And it was very expensive to build the platform. So I decided, well, I could probably do it for less money myself. So I hired some programmers, Bill and Justin, who still work with EGI today, and they built the platform. It turned out to be just as expensive because it took them a long time to build it and manage it and all those things. But when I sold that platform to EGIA, I wanted to build another sales training platform for my new book, Consistency Selling, general sales, not HVAC sales. And I needed a new learning platform. This time, I called David Delgado back, and he jokes about it this day. It took him 4 years to close me on that Lightspeed deal. And I'm telling you, that 4 years, I heard from him at least, I'm going to say 8 to 10 times a year. Every couple of months, he would call, hey, how you doing? And half the time, it was about football or it was about hockey. Or whatever. He's a hockey nut. And just different relationship building things he would do. And 4 years later, when I decided I'm going to build a platform, who do you think I called? And it was a $150,000 purchase to build that platform. So you might not hang in there 4 years on a sales lead, but if you're closing 30 or 40% of your deals, that's hundreds of no sales. Somebody's getting those deals. We got to follow up. I don't care how you do it. Yeah. Grind the phones, knock on doors, use technology, doesn't matter, but you got to follow up.